Welcome to IN60. I'm Peter White, and my guest today is Cory Martin, CEO of Barrow Hanley, part of the Perpetual Group. Cory, welcome. Going to ask you a series of short, sharp questions, looking for concise answers. You can pass on anyone, and your time starts now. If there's one asset you could hold over the next decade, what would that be?
From a retail perspective, if you were to hold one stock, I'd probably say Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway and one stock gives you exposure to tech, telecom, financials, energy, very diversified business. And it's not all about Warren Buffett. It's about the underlying managements of these companies are top tier.
In the event of financial Armageddon, what do you own? Crypto, treasuries, cash, or gold?
Well, there's a saying that cash is king, and that's probably true. So that's probably the first place you'd want to be, although it would degrade with inflation. I think you can still buy U.S. treasuries if you stay on the short end of the yield curve, but you've got to move very quickly because that'll be priced in very quickly.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Probably two things. One was from my father at an early age, and he said, you're going to make mistakes. That's part of living. When you make a mistake, acknowledge that mistake, learn from it where you can, and then move it over here and forget about it and move forward. Don't let it dictate where you're going to go next. The second thing would be, and I got this from John Templeton early on as a value investor where I worked 25 years ago, was, never blindly follow the herd. Do your own analysis using facts that are available to you. Sometimes the herd's going to be right. Over the short term, definitely can be right. But a lot of times when the herd's going this way, it's creating huge dislocations in the market where you can actually find bargains that are being ignored by the herd, and that'll set you up for your future returns to outperform.
Could you explain your investment philosophy in 3 words?
I'd probably say buy value now.
What's the single most important ratio when assessing a business in your view?
We're always looking at a number of factors to assess a business. We're focused on return on invested capital, the ability of managements to have good records. We're also looking for free cash flow generation and the ability of a business to reinvest in the business, because that reinvestment rate is what's going to drive future earnings.
Inflation, bond yields, geopolitics, valuations, regulation. Which of those macro factors represent the single biggest risk in your view?
Well, as a bottom-up manager, we really try to avoid making predictions or macro binomial bets on something happening. But I would say of those, geopolitics is probably the biggest risk because it's difficult, if not impossible, to predict, and it can have a domino effect that is unpredictable. And we're seeing that now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so that's, other macro risks, inflation, yield curve, all those kind of things. From a bottom-up perspective, you can actually exploit those into your bottom-up, and you can incorporate trends into your earnings power of a company. And so those are a little easier to deal with than sort of unexpected geopolitical risk. Any
particular market sectors have the best outlook in the next 5 years?
Over the next 5 years, I am certain it will not look like the prior 5 years. We've got a totally different environment now. We've got rising inflation, rising global rates, unprecedented global stimulus. We have $30 trillion globally of monetary and fiscal stimulus in the market. We've never seen that kind of stimulus before. We've also got record high valuation spreads between growth and value, and we've got record high performance spreads. And so the market is very narrow, and so I would probably lean away from making a prediction on what's going to work. But it's not going to be the same thing that just worked for the past 5 years.
I'll put you down as a pass for that one. What about red flags? One red flag that it concerns you most when you're looking at a company?
Right now, we are really keenly focused on commodity price inflation and input costs for companies, particularly in the consumer staples and consumer discretionary area. And we want to make sure that, and we are finding value in these areas because they're out of favor. People are worried about supply chain management. They're worried about inflation. So the names that we are picking up in the consumer area and some materials, we're being very focused on, can we, once inflation curve bends and normalizes, it doesn't have to necessarily go down, but if it's flat, then we want to make sure we own the right companies that can pass through these costs to their customers.
Finally, the most pressing question of all, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
I'd say no.
Cory, thanks very much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Peter.